Alderwoman and candidate for mayor, Cara Spencer, is now on the record. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
You're leading in the polls, you're leading in fundraising, and at least according to that recent survey we saw from Remington Research, you're running against an unpopular incumbent. But she's been in the hot seat. She's been in that office taking all the heat during pressing times. You haven't served in that role just yet. So if dissatisfied voters do ultimately decide to elect you and make you mayor, how do we know that you'll run the city any differently?
Oh, well, I mean, I think, first and foremost, I have a track record of getting things done. I have a plan for doing some of the things I've talked about, how to better start to address potholes, how to better, do some of the city's services. But at the end of the day, I think what people are really frustrated with is a lack of transparency and a lack of, just good old-fashioned good government. I have a track record of doing right by voters, and I think adherence to good government policies are really important to city voters at this point. Trust in their city government.
I'm looking for a little something more. Saying potholes is good, but you're going to have the same head count of city workers if you swear the oath of office the same as the incumbent mayor has now. So what changes exactly?
The current mayor and I have some very similar overlapping stated values, and I think our approach to doing things is different. I mean, I'm the type of person that's going to roll up her sleeves and, get the job done. And I think voters see that enthusiasm, that urgency, and that block and tackle. I mean, getting on the ground and getting the work done myself, with our city employees. But, that sort of mentality of let's get this done.
A lot of our viewers and city voters will remember you ran for mayor 4 years ago in 2021.
I did.
And in those debates, there was a lot of talk about ARPA money. Here we are 4 years later. We know that the deadline for the Board of Aldermen to allocate that money or to put it into a certain category has come and gone, so you can't make any changes to that anymore. But the mayor's office can still make changes in specific contracts and how that money is spent specifically.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Board of Aldermen, our job with regards to the ARPA money was done years ago. Those allocations were made, and how you actually put those into action is really up to the mayor's office in large part.
And at the time that we're sitting down here for this interview, all of the money is allocated, but just 37% of it is spent, meaning more than $300 million still sits in city coffers yet to go out the door. How much of that $300 million will you review?
Oh, we're going to take a full review of it. Look, I mean, from what we've seen uncovered, just last week, the comptroller was down at the Board of Aldermen, indicating that she's going to call for a full pause on the North City Grant Program. I mean, the problems that we've seen in just the investigations that have been done by the media, yourself included, have unearthed an enormous number of very serious questions. And I think, I am very worried that the federal government will start to claw some of those funds back. And so we're going to take a full review.
Does that mean if you were elected that contractors who do business with the city should expect delays?
That's a good question, Mark. I mean, I think, especially some of the contractors that have already been working with the city and have a track record, some of the things that were allocated funds for example, street repair and street investments and those types of things are done through citywide contracts and contractors that have had a long-standing relationship with the city of St. Louis. I think some of that's a little different, but certainly some of these very specific programs like the Private Building Stabilization Program, the North City Grant Program, these programs that are outside the normal activities of the city absolutely, deserve a full review.
After the Rams money bill fell apart and unraveled in rather spectacular fashion at City Hall in recent weeks, it looks like the next person who wins the mayor's race will have a significant hand in shaping the generational Rams settlement funds. When you stood with three of your colleagues and initially proposed a bill to spend $100 million downtown, the message at the time was, hurry up, let's get this money out the door. We can't wait any longer.
That's right. I mean, well, it was downtown in North St. Louis and other parts of the city, but you're right,
Yes.
a big chunk of it was
I shouldn't omit those. That was the signature item because it attracted.
In some ways, I think, having this sort of pause is helpful. I mean, at this point, I'm walking very cautiously through spending the Rams money. We had, we've been giving out money back with regards to the earnings tax at a much higher rate than we anticipated. The population loss that we've seen is resulting in a tax base that's leaving for St. Louis County and other parts of the region. Lawsuits, the city just lost an enormous lawsuit, almost $20 million this year, and there are several outstanding. So that coupled with a federal government that has made some head spinning, declarations of pulling back funding, especially for cities like St. Louis, could really impact our bottom line, impact some of the money that we require to do basic things like serving homelessness, investing in housing. These are programs and things that we rely on the federal government to fund.
The federal funds freeze certainly could have big impacts, but your suggestion to switch gears from saying let's hurry up and spend to hold on, let's have caution. You were saying that even before Donald Trump swore the oath of office. So I guess why the change of heart there?
Well, I mean, I mean, certainly I couldn't have predicted the swift nature or the swiftness with which our federal government is really making big sweeping changes. I think the large degree of unknown has really caused me to take a more cautionary and more, slower approach to how we're going to spend those funds.
Would you intend to spend all $300 million down in the a first 4-year term, or could you see some of that money still living on?
I mean, we're going to have to wait and see how things shake out on the federal side and what implications they have on the city of St. Louis. I mean, I couldn't predict that at this point. I mean, gosh, the announcement of furloughs, potential furloughs, and to the NGA staff and all these other investments. I mean, these could have extremely large financial impacts on the city of St. Louis, domino effects. So I think it's really important at this point, having not been able to predict this level of chaos, that we take a slower approach than I initially anticipated.
So wait and size up the cuts before spending. Let's move on to the safety, because this is a big part of the mayor's office. You've said that you oppose a state takeover of the police department at the city level, but you've also said you can understand why officers may want to see changes. How exactly are you working to influence the outcome of this decision in Jefferson City? Do you have any idea what changes the police union wants, or what changes the governor may want?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think a lot of what I'm doing right now is really behind the scenes, building relationships and trying to understand how to maneuver through this. I am in favor of keeping local control, but as I've stated, I think the most effective argument that they have on the other side of this in favor of state control is that our police officers, by and large, would rather have the state of Missouri in charge of the police department as their employer than the city of St. Louis. And so understanding the...
Have you persuaded them that they would change their position if you were the mayor?
Well, look, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why that is. I mean, everything from pure procurement of shirts, fixing of vehicles, to hiring practices. I mean, there's bargaining, all these things are really adding up to a police force, a staffing force that would rather have this change. I think there's a growing degree of confidence in me as the potential mayor to feel a better path forward. But at the end of the day, I'm not there yet. And so, what I'm doing right now is really, sort of laying the foundation for how to do this, how to move through these questions and the outcomes in a way that can best support our workforce and public safety in the city.
Have you talked to Governor Kehoe?
I have not talked to him about this issue, no.
Would you welcome a conversation like that even
Absolutely.
before
and
the
we,
election?
We have so many overlapping friends and colleagues. I've been talking to those folks before, directly contacting the new governor on this.
In 2021, when you were running for this office, you said you wanted to see racism rooted out of the police department. Has it been?
I still think there's some issues in our police department, and I think, building trust within the police department and within the broader community is a key component to a public, a criminal justice system that works. And I think we've got some work to do there. I think one of the strongest and maybe not as obvious ways of supporting our police is sometimes calling out questionable or bad policing. That's the policing that gets headlines. Recently we saw when a couple of officers drove a car into a bar in South St. Louis, and sort of the response was, well, it's really difficult to drive an SUV, which is just so insulting to the overwhelming majority of police officers who obviously know how to drive an SUV. And I think while it may not be intuitive, sort of calling that out and rooting out problems of any kind within the police department, including racism or other things like that, is a key component to building a stronger and more integrated police department.
On that issue, the city councilor's office, the circuit attorney, the mayor, for a while, and they eventually showed some of the body camera footage to the affected families and a few local advocates. You've talked a lot about transparency. I wonder what that looks like in real life. If you get presented with one of these high-profile cases, a police shooting, police run into a building, are you as mayor going to order the police to release the footage immediately to the public?
You know, I'm always going to err on that side. I think the more transparency, the better. I can't specifically speak on instances because I wasn't invited to that table. I don't, to this day, have those details. But I do think in that position, it's important to always err on the side of sharing as much information as possible with the general public.
One of the most important and perhaps underrated powers of a mayor is the power of appointment, putting the right people in really hard jobs. In fact, 4 years ago, when you were running for this job, you said the city needs a mayor with a team that we can trust. Who's on your team? Who do you want to lead the police department, for example?
You know, I'm not ready to make any public declarations of those.
It's a quick transition. You get elected and you're in the job like right away.
So. No, it's 2 weeks. It's absolutely right. But look, I mean, we're still building that out right now. We're having a lot of conversations about what that needs to look like and building some panels to help us figure that out. You know, it's not something that I think any mayor should make those decisions in a vacuum.
So if you can't tell me who, maybe you can tell me if you'd like to see changes at all. The police chief?
Well, I mean, look, again, you know, I'm not going to put anybody in a hot seat right now because I think building those relationships and building those teams and that sort of buy-in is a really important process. I think our police chief has done a really great job on a lot of things. And, you know, I have some concerns about our public safety director. I mean, some of the allegations that have come out are very, very worrisome. But, you know, without getting into specific, you know, HR personnel issues, I'll say that we're actively building a team and we're looking at how we can develop, you know, the overall cabinet and the department heads that can best serve our city.
Last I checked, I think there were 22 different departments that all report to the mayor, and you would appoint someone, perhaps, to take over that many. I know you've been critical of the directors of Personnel, Streets, SLDC, and the City Justice Center. The mayor has appointed people to each of those. How do you, if you're not going to tell us yet if you'd make changes there, how do you evaluate the mayor's judgment in picking people for those roles?
I mean, you could just see the turnover. I mean, it's just been abysmal. You know, I think, you know, the buck does start with the mayor. We've talked a lot recently about a city manager or a city administrator. This is something that Alderwoman Velasquez of the 6th Ward has really been doing an enormous amount of work on. And I'm absolutely in favor of moving to professionalizing how the city departments are not only selected, but evaluated on a regular basis. You know, I mean, it's clear to me that the political appointment system, at least in this administration, is not always working very well. And it's not nimble enough to address those lack of responsiveness issues that we've seen in the jail, that we've seen in the street department, that we've seen in SLDC. And so we need a more professional evaluation, a criterion process for addressing personnel issues.
Yeah, you know, one thing that I've seen, not just in this race, but in races, you know, you cover campaigns long enough, you see people that are on the outside that want to get the job, they pledge transparency. So many of them get the job, and then they change their tune.
That's true.
How can we trust that you won't be that person?
Well, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, my word is just as good as my actions, and so I think, you know, we'll have to see how that plays out. But I mean, I have a clear, you know,
is there something concrete you can commit to on that front in terms of transparency?
You know, some of the things that you've talked to, Mark, and that I've talked with you about offline is something like a loose stat, you know, where you are evaluating departments from within and producing regular reports to the community on how long it takes to fill a pothole, which parts of the cities are, you know, are lacking in trash removal, monitoring of the sort of city force, you know, when it comes to those very critical snow removal, et cetera. And making those reports public, I think, is a key component.
And the city collects that data now just to measure their own progress, but it's all internal. They don't share it with the board.
That's exactly right. And so I think
you've actually kind of scooped me on a story I'm working on right now, but that's okay. We'll let that sit.
Is that right?
It's great. It's still in progress. It's reporting that's happening, but I do appreciate the point you make. You're saying you would make that data public for the public to look at.
Absolutely. It's a key component to reporting and, you know, identifying what's working and identifying sometimes what's not working so you can pivot and build the trust you need to make those systems work better.
We're running out of time here, but I want to ask you quickly. At a neighborhood event in your ward just last week, you said, quote, "We closed the workhouse, right? And guess what? The deaths in our Justice Center have spiked ever since." You supported closing the workhouse. The mayor did it. She's now running for re-election on that. Are you saying that you were wrong?
Well, look, I mean, this was interesting. We talked about this a lot in the last election cycle. And by the end of that election cycle, I was very hesitant. I did support closing the workhouse, and I think it has a meaningful result to the community. I mean, this was an institution that caused a lot of harm. But at the end of the day, we were clearly not prepared to have the CJC be the only incarceration facility in the city of St. Louis. The locks didn't work. It's not big enough. It does not have any access to the outside. There were a whole host of issues that became very, very apparent.
Would you
right
build
off
a
the
new
bat.
jail?
That's a tough question. The workhouse itself, which was in fairly decent working order not too long ago, has seen.
You called it a symbol of oppression.
That it is a symbol of oppression, Mark. I still stand by those words, and I think for many members of our community, it absolutely was and remains so. But at the end of the day, I think the CJC has shown to be even worse. The deaths we've seen in there, the fact that, like I was pointing out, the locks aren't working, haven't been working for numbers of years.
They've been
on end.
updated.
They have been updated, but this went on for years. A young woman was sexually assaulted in the facility. The lack of really understanding what the solution has been worse than the problem. And to me, that requires a step back, an evaluation, some community conversation. Failing to house federal detainees means we're shipping people all over the Midwest. That means their families, their lawyers, all of these components of the criminal justice system are having to scatter throughout Missouri, Arkansas, et cetera. And the result, again, has been, unfortunately, I think, worse than the problem we were trying to solve.
So just to put a bottom line there, you're open to a new jail, but that's a tough conversation.
It is a tough conversation.
Do I understand you correctly?
But I am open to a new solution. It's clear what we're doing with the CJC is doing the opposite of build trust in the criminal justice system.
There's no yard there. There's very limited recreation inside of that facility,
and
so it's a tough spot.
It's a tough spot.
I wish we had more time, but there are campaign events and debates on the horizon, forums. Any viewers can tune in there and see more of that conversation as we continue.
That's
but thanks
right.
for joining us.
We've got one almost every night. You can check us out at caraspencer.com.
All right, thanks for your time.
Yep.
We're back in a moment.